Imagine waking to another day of good intentions and half-finished projects, a blinking notification, a browser tab screaming for attention, a list of promises to yourself that quietly shrinks as distractions expand. You recognize the feeling, a restless mind that wants to be sharp but drifts, a will that wants to be steady but wobbles. What if that edge could be honed not by motivation, but by a set of practical principles that train the mind like an artisan trains a tool? The outline for this script guided the structure of what follows. There is an old Stoic posture toward the world, the belief that while events happen, our judgments about them are ours to govern. For the Stoics, discipline begins not with willpower alone, but with how we see what happens and how we translate that seeing into careful, repeated action. They spoke as therapists of the mind, not merely inspirational speakers, offering exercises that, when practiced, changed a person's identity. In their brief counsel, we find a program for our distracted age, small, repeated choices that reshape who we are and how we respond. Begin by noticing one thing. Most of what troubles and scatters you is wasteful attention. The first principle is simple and decisive. Divide your world into what you can control and what you cannot. This is not a theological abstraction, but a cognitive boundary. When you worry about results, reputations, or the random swirl of events, you dilute effort and generate anxiety. Stop. Ask the single question, is this within my control? If it is, do the deliberate, useful thing. If it isn't, refuse to surrender your energy to it. The ancient teacher who put this most plainly insisted that some things are up to us and some things are not, a distinction you can use immediately when your mind begins to spin. Practice a 60-second reframe the next time anxiety rises. Name the worry, sort it, and choose a single next step that is yours to take. Learning to accept what happens, not as passivity, but as the redirection of wasted force is the next turning point. There's a phrase for this, love of fate. It sounds grand, but in practice it means transforming resistance into inquiry. When a plan unravels, the default is blame and recrimination, which consume willpower without changing the situation. Instead, try asking, how can this improve my judgment? How can it train me? When you treat setbacks as data and practice, you reclaim the energy previously spent on complaints and convert it into disciplined response. This is not fatalism. It is pragmatic acceptance that frees resources for action. A related exercise that strengthens steadiness is premeditation of difficulties. Imagine small losses and obstacles before they strike. Picture the problem you feared just enough that it loses its power to surprise you. This is not a pessimist's rumination, but a rehearsal. If you imagine your phone dying before an important call, you'll plan a backup battery. If you imagine rejection, you'll prepare the next attempt. The practice is brief, 5 minutes a week, and its return is enormous. Reduced panic, clearer priorities, and faster recovery when trouble appears. Another discipline. Invite manageable discomfort into your life. The modern default is comfort, and comfort dulls the capacity to endure. Begin small, a cold shower, an unfed hour, a deliberate 15 minutes of work that you would usually postpone. Each tolerated difficulty increases your range of choice. You teach yourself that effort is bearable, that postponement is not necessary, that you can act despite unease. These micro-habits of voluntary difficulty accumulate into the sturdiness required for long projects, late nights, and the small moral demands of daily life. If you want sharper priorities, let the fact of your finitude help. Remembering that life is limited, not as a grim terror but as clarifying light, gives urgency to what matters. When you spend another hour on trivial scrolling, ask, am I spending time as if it were endless? Replace that hour with the single important action you will later be glad you took. A short morning prompt, a quiet note. If today were my last week, what would I do differently? Can tilt your day away from distraction and toward depth. Attention itself is a muscle. Guarding impressions is the core craft of a disciplined mind. Decide what to let in and how to respond. Our phones and feeds train reactive attention. Stoic practice trains selective attention. Build simple rules. The 3-second pause before responding to a message. Scheduled blocks without interruptions. A single attention anchor. A breath, a phrase, to re-enter focus. Every moment you reclaim from distraction is a small act of freedom that compounds into a sharper mind. There's a deeper reorientation beneath these techniques, the transformation of the metric by which you live. Modern life often measures success by externals, likes, title, salary, and those metrics fracture identity whenever fortunes change. Stoic wisdom places value on internal goods, character, judgment, and courage. Decide to measure yourself by choices aligned with virtue rather than by applause. Frame goals as becoming statements. Be the kind of person who finishes what they start, rather than get X followers. Practically, keep a weekly checklist of the virtues you care about and a single corresponding action for each day. Discipline is not merely self-directed, it is social. The Stoics spoke of a web of roles, friend, parent, colleague, citizen, that call us to act for others. When discipline becomes only self-optimization, it loses its moral torque. Before you choose how to spend your attention, ask which role you are serving. Prioritize what sustains relationships and responsibilities. A small daily practice. Perform one action explicitly because it helps another person without immediate personal reward. That habit connects discipline to meaning, and meaning fuels endurance in a way ephemeral rewards cannot. Another essential skill is learning to separate fact from the story you tell about it. Our immediate impressions are raw. Our narratives clip them into meaning, often distorting reality. Train the habit of asking 3 questions before action. What is the fact? What am I assuming? What action would a person of sound judgment take? This creates pause and clarity. In practice, when a terse email arrives, list the observable facts, set aside assumptions about intent, and choose a response that reflects your values. The result is fewer reactive mistakes and a steadier mind. Emotions will always surface. Discipline does not mean becoming a machine. The Stoics described passions as judgments gone astray and taught us to use reason to reshape them. When anger or shame rises, adopt a simple ritual. Breathe, name the emotion, and ask the single practical question: what can I control in this moment? Turning emotion into a short deliberative process channels its energy toward effective action. This is not suppression, it is transformation, making emotion an ally rather than an enemy. Small actions are the currency of transformation. Grand revolutions of character rarely occur overnight. They are the result of tiny, repeated choices. Choose anchors that are almost trivial but consistent. 2 push-ups upon waking, 5 minutes of focused reading, a nightly note of 1 win. Pair new behaviors with existing routines using an if-then formula. If I finish dinner, then I will spend 5 focused minutes on my most important task. Over weeks and months, these micro-actions compound into identity change. You become the person who keeps commitments, who sustains attention, who chooses well. That capacity to integrate is the telos of Stoic practice, living according to nature, not in the vague sense of hiking and herbs, but as aligning reason, role, and practice. A life fragmented into dissonant parts, ethical at home, reactive at work, distracted in private, erodes coherence and breeds the very restlessness we seek to cure. Once a month, conduct a brief alignment audit. Map your central values, the roles you inhabit, and one daily practice that binds the two. Make adjustments. Let your habits mirror your aims. All these elements interact. Control sharpens focus. Premeditation reduces surprise. Voluntary hardship builds stamina. Attention rules protect the work of the will. Internal goods anchor identity. Social roles supply meaning. Clear judgment calms reactivity. Emotion becomes intelligible, and tiny repeated actions compound. Together, they form a practical program, not a checklist to admire, but a set of ongoing practices to inhabit. If you want to turn insight into a manageable experiment, try a 30-day plan composed of micro-practices taken from what I've described. Each morning, begin with a 1-minute mortality prompt and a 3-breath attention anchor. During the day, apply the dichotomy of control check when worry arises. Once daily, perform a 15-minute block of voluntary difficulty, focused work, cold exposure, or any manageable hardship immediately after a set trigger. Weekly, rehearse 5 minutes of negative visualization, and each night note the single action you took that aligned with your values. At the end of the month, perform the alignment audit and decide the next cycle. We anchor these practices not in abstract virtue signaling, but in identity. Adopt the phrase, "I am the kind of person who," and complete it with one specific behavior. Repeat it aloud, write it down, and let it guide small daily choices. Identity frames your decisions in a way that motivation alone never will. Along the way, keep the company of the Stoic teachers, not as distant idols, but as practical voices. One taught plainly about the boundary of our control, insisting we accept what is not ours to decide. Another urged that we love whatever happens, turning fate into an instructor rather than an enemy. A third recommended exercises in imagining loss, not to make you fearful, but to reveal value and prepare the mind. Let those voices remind you that discipline is a craft learned by practice and iteration. Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca.
Expect failure. The Stoic path is not a straight line. You will forget, you will lapse, and you will return. That is the pattern of any craft. Respond to lapses as data, not verdicts. Reframe mistakes as practice. Observe what triggered you, adjust the environment, and repeat the tiny habit. Each recovery is training for future steadiness. What does this look like in ordinary life? Imagine a week where you must deliver a project, manage a family need, and face a sudden expense. Begin each morning with your 1-minute mortality prompt. When the expense causes worry, use the dichotomy of control to decide immediate steps you can take and to stop the rumination you cannot influence. Before an important meeting, run a 2-minute negative visualization, what could go wrong and what you will do about it. When fatigue tempts you to seek escaping comforts, perform 10 minutes of voluntary discomfort, brief focused work, or a cold shower to remind yourself that endurance is a practiced skill. The small, consistent choices, attention rules, micro-practices, and the nightly identity note keep you steady. Over time, the same week becomes less chaotic and more aligned. If you are tempted to treat these practices as moral perfectionism, resist that. Discipline in Stoic terms is the cultivation of practical capacity, not self-flagellation. The aim is to enlarge your power to act well, to be present, and to serve the roles you care about. That expansion of agency is its own reward. As the day ends, reflect briefly. What one action today aligned with your deepest aim? What distracted you unnecessarily? Which small change will you make tomorrow? These questions are not an exam but a map. Use them to course correct. If you found this useful, choose one micro-practice and try it now. A 60-second attention anchor, 3 slow breaths, and a brief note of the single most important next action. If you try it, leave 1 sentence below describing which principle you'll practice this week and why. If you want a compact roadmap, save the 30-day plan described here and test it for 1 month. Small, consistent practices shape character in a way flashy inspiration never will. Discipline, as the Stoics taught, is not punishment. It is the craft of becoming oneself. In the steady repetition of small decisions, a mind is sharpened and a life is aligned. If you choose to begin with one tiny, non-negotiable action. Then do it again tomorrow. If you liked this approach, like the video, share it with someone who needs steadier attention, and subscribe for more guided practice in living deliberately.